Loose watercolor fans, rejoice, because today we're reviewing art by Viktoria Prischedko. Now, I've received quite a lot of requests on featuring this amazing artist. She's, I believe, originally from Moldova and is conquering Europe with her art. Very loose and atmospheric watercolor paintings, lots of big areas of strong blues and reds and oranges and yellows. Just beautiful art, and what I love the most about it is, and this is something you hear me talk about a lot lately, is the way she directs our attention. She tells us what to focus on. She tells us what's interesting, and I love that, and it's something I want to develop more in my art, which is why I really wanted to show paintings of hers. But in any case, let's jump into some paintings, and I hope you're gonna enjoy this one. So here's one that's quite literal, and I want to start with that because that's the most literal painting you'll see probably, but I absolutely love it. So notice large areas of paint. You're going to see soon a painting that I think better represents her more typical style, what you'll see, but so much wet in wet wherever possible. And then what she does is she leaves a couple of places that are sharp, and that really helps commanding the attention. So you see the people here guide us through the painting all the way to the depth. But if you look at the walls of the buildings and this building here in the shadow, this building in the background, they're all very loose and free. Everything is wet in wet. Everything is kind of blended. Some work, I know she uses masking fluid or masking tape, but here most of what you see is really just, highlights she painted around. And her command of wet in wet is very impressive. Notice here, for example, in the entrance to this kind of European architecture building, you have all these arches, and it really shows through, and this door, everything really shows through nicely. But the main thing here is this: the way it commands our attention is beautiful, and you know exactly what to look at. You get this effect of focus that not all watercolor paintings have. I'm certainly working on developing more of that feeling. Here's one that I feel like is a little more typical of what you'd see of her, especially when it comes to these strong yellows and reds and blues. That's actually not an easy effect to achieve, leaving these paints to blend, but not to blend completely, fully, and preserving the individuality of the trees here, in this case, as opposed to the building in the background. That's something that's not as easy. Here, for example, the building, if you notice, the top part of the wash got dried because you can see some sharp edges. The more we go down, the blurrier it gets, and that's really a challenging thing to achieve. Now, if we go down to the street level, you'll see all of these people, and that's another thing that's really beautiful. You can see it's very sharp. It pulls our attention to it, and again, she has always a strong lead in, so you get this road or this trail, and it leads you through to the painting. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of the duality is very present here. The cool, warm, sharp, blended and blurred, horizontal and vertical with the trees and the cast shadows on the road. And you get this in every level of the painting, the beautiful color, the beautiful blended. Notice this section, for example. You get these old oil lamps or whatever these are, and they're relatively sharp, especially around the top parts. But then if you look at this doorways here, the three doors or whatever these are, they're very blended. It's so hard to control wet in wet that way, and also have it in contrast with something that's a little sharper. That's really a beautiful achievement. Let's look at some others. We have a lot to look at. So here's a more, I guess, monochrome type of painting, more reds and yellows, a little more unified, less cool, warm. There is a very subtle play of warm and cool here. If you notice around the bottom of this entrance and behind the awnings, there is a bit of that. Notice the beautiful representation of the architecture. You can see some of the pencil lines here, some blossoms. Nobody cares. Nobody even notices them, and mostly plays with the value. So the value here leads the three-dimensionality and the good sense of depth and focus. And look at this. It's just a beautiful scene. And again, she has this figure here that's meant to kind of help us get into the scene. It connects this foreground that's relatively empty with the background. And this beautiful control of wet and wet, that's really, really not to be taken for granted. That's beautiful. Let's see what else we have here. I wanted to show you a couple of different works, so not just cityscapes. So we have a more figurative work and just beautiful. She has that very same motive of warm and cool and different varieties of edges and a lot of just going a little crazy, but in many places with the blending and if you let's zoom out a little and you'll see this is beautiful, beautiful work. So just conveyed in a beautiful manner. And I know that if she'd want to, she could produce something that's more literal, but I think she really loves and enjoys this. What I love about this one in particular is, again, we're going a bit monochromatic here, so more blues, but a bit of red and yellow at the bottom. But the sense of scale here is what fascinates me the most. Notice how we have these huge, well, you won't call them arches, but I'm sure someone will comment down there the professional name of this. I know every little aspect of the European architecture has its own names, which is beautiful. But the sense of scale here is so beautiful. The tiny people and then a huge, huge structure behind them. It really puts things in perspective. And if you look at the structure itself, you can see through the window at the front and then the window on the other side of the wall. And that conveys a feeling that the building actually has something behind it. And all sorts of different effects and wet pulls of the brush. And I'm not even sure if that's something that, it's a glass reflecting someone standing in front of it, probably. So it's not the best quality of photo, or maybe that's part of the painting, I don't know, but it's beautiful. Let's see what else we have here. Notice this special color scheme. You don't see much of that, this pinkish purple, then turquoise for the sky, then reds and yellows. I love that. It actually encourages me to try more of these kinds of weird color combinations. We've also seen them in some of the previous videos. Of Mark Foley also has this kind of an interesting use of colors. So beautiful. And all these, you see the reflections. So there's this wet feeling of yellow here, yellow at the bottom, red on this figure, then red at the bottom. These lights are reflected in the on the ground. Very smart. And notice how it's not realistic in any way. It's not realistic at all. It's not. I would say it's very much the artist's vision, but it is an expression of what they see, and it is a what you'd call it. I forgot the word, but it is work that represents the representative work, basically. Let's see what else we have here. Her ability to convey night scenes, that's also another thing that's very interesting, because notice how, because that her darks aren't as dark as you would expect, but you can tell this is evening just by the blue here and then all of this yellow there. That's really inspiring, actually. It's another way of tackling a night scene without using any black, essentially. There's barely any black here. Maybe just a tiny bit near the top of this tower, or maybe on the rooftop here next to the windows, but very little of it. Now here, these branches, I'm pretty sure it's masking fluid. I can't imagine how you'd leave these kinds of highlights, but she does seem to have an initial wash that's very blended and messy, and then adding a bit more details later on. So beautiful, beautiful. Let's see what else. Oh, I really like this one because this actually conveys, we've seen some rainy days. Now this is stronger sunlight. The way you can tell is by the shadows here on the top of the tower. And the contrast here between the fronts of the buildings and the left side. So whenever you find yourself too caught up in the details, and this is something I'm working on, how to teach people to let it go. Whenever you find yourself, too literal and trying to get every small detail in, look at works like these ones. Like the paintings you see here, they really show you how, if you have a good plan beforehand, you don't need to be literal with everything you show. You don't have to show every small detail. You can simplify it with the sketch, and you can see her pencil lines here. Hopefully you can see this line here, and there. A bunch of lines. If you have a good plan for simplification, you will be able to do that, and it will still convey your vision. So you don't have to be literal and show every single thing. Hopefully that gives you that encouragement. Water. One of the fewer pure water works I've seen of hers, and it's beautiful. I probably missed a bunch of them, but I really, really love this one. And the way, again, she controls those the light yellows still maintain their individuality within the wet and wet. And I'm very curious about the technique, actually, of leaving some edges soft and then some very sharp and then some very blended, and I wonder if it's done purely wet and wet with some parts drying, or she actually re-wets the surface again. From the videos I did see, she really thoroughly wets the paper before getting started. She takes a sponge and she fills the paper with water. And perhaps she's using very thick paper as well to withstand all this water, because this is really pure wet and wet. It's crazy. Notice this. There's barely any details but the people here in this tower top left. And what's beautiful about this is, again, the sense of scale. Out of all of this scene, there's barely anything but small sections that are more fleshed out. And that's all we need, really, to figure out what we're looking at, you know. And you can take this to whatever you want. Maybe this tower is in the background, maybe it's part of a rooftop here, but it conveys the feeling very, very well. I love her evening scenes. I really, really love them. Now here, obviously, we have a more rainy scene, especially you can tell by the umbrellas, and you can tell by the reflections, and I love that. And notice how softness and then sharpness with this stripes here, the crosswalk. Then you get the softness of the building, sharpness of the trees, and even in the trees you have the variation of softness and sharpness. And this really encourages me to try out some new colors, so some specific colors, testing out different combinations I'm not familiar with, primary and tertiary and secondary colors, you know, all sorts of things. Really beautiful. Here's another one. I wanted to show you something a little different, so kind of a portrait. This could be based on her, by the way. She has a similar hairstyle, or maybe I'm mistaken. I've seen a couple of pictures, but I don't know. But again, beautiful, and she preserves that unique fingerprint, so to speak, of her uniqueness of watercolor, you know. Several paints, sharp and blended. Even here, she has this motive of blended tree branches at the back. She probably painted them, then went over them with water. It doesn't seem like purely wet and wet. It seems like more of an area that's been painted on and then was wet, or was wetted. Can I say that? I don't know. Beautiful work. I think we have only a couple of more, so let's see. Here is another beautiful one, a little looser, and I wanted to show you how even more loosely it works. You don't need much. A bunch of figures, a bunch of reflections, a bunch of indications of buildings, very fast. This may very well have been done on location. Beautiful work, and I think we're really close to the couple of last ones. So here's another one. Now notice how she's not scared of using the same color, like red, all throughout the details. Not just, you know, red isn't a color you necessarily think about filling in an entire restaurant with chairs, tables, you know, the people connected all. Alvaro Castanet also does that quite a lot, and I love that. I love this kind of thing. He also does it with interior scenes, which is fascinating. So you, and notice these chairs. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but she's not afraid to do that and to let the paint kind of be more dominant and lead the scene. And that's something I would love to encourage you to also give it a shot. Now notice how this is just one big lump of paint around the awnings, around it's all connected. And these chairs here, beautifully done. Just a couple of more loose, gentle brush strokes. You can tell this is the other side of the restaurant or another restaurant, and that's it. There's nothing here, and you don't have to spread your attention thin through looking at all of these small details. You know exactly what's interesting here, and you can stare at this for hours. I could stare at this for hours, and probably if I'd seen the original, even more, even longer. Another very wet scene. And again, notice the control here, how much he controls. It's all about timing. I want to do a video on that, more on wet and wet, pure wet and wet technique, and how to get the timing right. We'll talk about that in a future video. And lastly, I think, yeah, this is the last one. I really, really love this one. I wanted to save it for last. Same motives we've talked about, but the subject here is so beautiful and gentle. These lily pads, a red in the water. You wouldn't necessarily go for that. A lot of turquoise, a lot of purple, and it's so easy to understand what we're looking at. And that's a very interesting take on this very common subject with impressionistic art. And if you look at the background here as well, such looseness, freedom. You know, there's not a lot of white. Some of it is opaque paint, granted, but most of it, the paper is covered. And just with yellows and purples, complementary colors, and you get this beautiful sense of depth. And I think this, the vertical orientation, portrait orientation works really well for this kind of scene. And it's used a lot in this kind of scene. Fair enough. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed seeing these paintings. This is the last one. I learned a lot, and I'm going to try and apply a lot of these things. Now, let's wrap it up face to face. So this is it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, let me know in a comment down below if there are any other artists you want me to review. I have a huge list, and also I plan on making a lot of these episodes. So let me know. I always am looking for new artists. We've gone through quite a lot, and I hope to continue and make hundreds of episodes if it will be possible. So thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. That really helps the channel, and if you're enjoying it, why not hit the bell button, receive notifications for new vids. I will talk to you again in another vid real soon.